Hey everyone, Cassius here, welcoming you back to the Shakespeare Minute. Today is another episode of Shakespeare Themes, An End of a Tragedy. So today I am here to talk about the ends of a few tragedies and the people who end up in charge at the end of those stories. As you probably know, Shakespeare is very big on clearing the stage of most of the major players at the end of a tragedy. However, there is always somebody left to pick up the pieces. As TheGeekyBlonde of Pursued by a Bear put it in her Hamlet spoof, Shakespeare doesn't end his tragedies in a vacuum. And by the way, I have linked to her video in the description. So if there's no vacuum at the end of a tragedy, who's there to fill the inevitable power emptiness at the end? Because usually the people in charge are pretty much dead by the end of a tragedy. Well, to answer this question, I am going to take a look at 3 different tragedies and the people who end up in charge at the end of them. That is Lucius from Titus Andronicus, Malcolm from Macbeth, and Fortinbras from Hamlet. First, let's talk about Lucius from Titus Andronicus. Now, Titus Andronicus is Shakespeare's most viciously violent play, and we see 2 different people become emperor of this crazy world. In the beginning of the play, it's Saturninus, the oldest son of the previous emperor, given the job by Titus because Titus thinks that, well, you gotta give it to the oldest son of the previous guy out of a sense of duty. And then at the end, Titus's oldest son, Lucius, comes in and takes over because everybody else is pretty much dead. He has won the hearts of his army and he comes back to Rome to get rid of the old corrupted order led by Saturninus in the court of the Emperor of Rome. So we've got a lot of issues here, obviously, but what does Lucius have? Why does he come in at the end? And how is he contrasted with the old order? Well, the first interaction that he has with Saturninus is here in the beginning, and we already see that these are 2 people from very different, conflicting worlds and ideologies.
Patricians, draw your swords and sheathe the knot till Saturninus be Rome's emperor! Andronicus, would thou were shipped to hell rather than rob me of the people's hearts!
Proud Saturnine, interrupter of the good that noble-minded Titus means to thee.
Content thee, prince.
And the play is bookended again on the other side with Lucius confronting Saturninus in the domino death scene that is the finale. So Lucius comes into power, and the world that he has to take over here at the end is a pretty harsh one. But the first thing that we see him do, besides putting Aaron to death, is promising, well, that Aaron's child will live. There's no real sense of how well Aaron's child will do under the rule of Lucius, but the fact is that there is some semblance of order. He's also gotten this role through a very different means than Saturninus did. He actually has earned it in a way and gained the trust of a lot of people who follow him. So there is an idea that perhaps a new order is being established. There is no vacuum, and things have a shot at getting a little bit better. As with all these tragedies, there's a reason why the tragedy ends where it does, and perhaps the picking up the pieces will begin after that. Of course, in Macbeth, it's a little bit cleaner because the tragedy simply isn't as violent and crazy, but Malcolm, the older son of Duncan, who was killed in the beginning, comes in at the end after Macbeth is killed, and he gets to be king now. Besides the fact that there's Banquo's heirs to deal with later on, I do think that Malcolm, much like Lucius, is shown to have a kind of way about him that allows him to come in and be king. He understands very much what threat the court can be. He, unlike his father, who doesn't really see beyond people's faces. His father, Duncan, always makes these comments like, "I never thought that someone who looked so trustworthy could be so hateful," whereas Malcolm understands very well that people who smile and have these nice outward appearances might very well be problematic people to deal with, that they might, in fact, be plotting against you. And the fact that Malcolm understands this, whereas his father, the king at the beginning of the play, really didn't, shows that he's ready in a way that his father wasn't really to take on this Scotland.
Let's not consort with them. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy.
Of course, Macbeth is the king for much of the interim of the play, but what is Malcolm doing? Much like Lucius and Titus Andronicus, he goes off into another country to raise an army to attack the land that is rightfully his. Of course, Lucius did not know that he was going to be crowned when he came back. Malcolm was planning on it, but Malcolm realizes that it's not going to just be easy, and unlike his father, who simply took for granted people's allegiance to him, and Macbeth, who took for granted their enmity, Malcolm knows how to test and shift and move around and really judge other people for how trustworthy they should be. And when at the end he comes in, he creates a new titling system. The Thanes are now going to be called earls. Again, there's a sense that the world is changing, and there's a chance that the tragedy is going to be a thing of the past. The last of these three end of tragedy leaders that I'm going to talk about is Fortinbras. Now, Fortinbras is the much smaller character of these three. Both Lucius and Malcolm are major players in their respective roles and in their respective worlds, and Fortinbras really isn't a major player in Hamlet, especially in most cuttings of the play. However, the places where he pops up and the people who talk about him are interesting and revelatory, because Fortinbras is always in the back of people's minds. The whole idea that Norway might attack Denmark at some point throughout the plot of Hamlet is a very present fear. Claudius has to deal with it. That's the first thing that Claudius does in the play, is send out ambassadors to Norway so that they'll come back and say that hopefully, the peace has been established. But Fortinbras is looking to attack Denmark, so he's always there sort of in the wings, ready to come in and shake things up. In the beginning, he's described as someone coming back for his father's legacy, because his father lost a lot of Norway to Denmark, and now he wants to get those lands back after all these years. Of course, then his uncle tells him he can't, but he comes into Denmark at the end just for tribute purposes, and he ends up taking over. He has some rights of memory in this kingdom. Now, all we really know about Fortinbras, besides that he wants to take back the lands so by his father lost, is that, well, he's a military king, and his sense of honor impresses even Hamlet. Now, an earlier video of mine was about Hamlet and how he judges people. So if Hamlet can be impressed by a certain character, that isn't nothing. And it's not just about Hamlet being in his own head. He talks to a captain in the Norwegian army, and he gets a sense of what is going on. If Hamlet didn't approve of it, he would certainly say so. And someone whose approval is that hard to come by, saying that Fortinbras really speaks to a sense of honor in him, is certainly interesting, and it does absolutely contrast with Claudius and even old Hamlet a little bit, in the fact that he's doing something out of this sense of honor and righteousness, and that it's not just about the individual piece of land, but rather a grander kind of sense of moral outrage that his family line should be so slandered. And the fact that Hamlet reacts in such a way to it in a great speech, that my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth, is, I think, kind of interesting. Of course, when Fortinbras comes in at the end and takes up the mantle, he uses language that recalls Claudius in a very clear way. Claudius, when he becomes king, says, with one auspicious and one dropping eye, I'm happy to be king now, but I'm sad because I'm mourning my brother. And Fortinbras comes in and says, with sorrow I embrace my fortune. He is able to respect what he is seeing. He's a warrior king, but he comes in and he sees all this horror in the court, and he says, this is much amiss. This is not where people should be fighting. You go out and you fight for honor on the battlefield. You do not poison and murder each other at the court. And the fact that he can separate this, and he has just this sense of rightness in the world. Not righteousness, but rightness, the idea of what belongs where, that sort of makes him this politically savvy king like Claudius, but also the warrior king of old Hamlet. He takes the good parts of both of them and sort of sloughs off the bad parts of both of them too. So even in such a small cameo-ish kind of appearance, he is somebody who is probably a better leader than any of the options that we would have had in Denmark. So again, the old world going out, the new world coming in, because again, there's a reason why the tragedy ends here, and we can sum it up and move on. These three characters, I think, clearly show that Shakespeare doesn't like to just drop everything at the end of his tragedies and leave people in this vacuum, like, oh, everybody's dead and it's all over, and then like our world has just imploded and there's nothing left. That's not the case. The world of the main characters has imploded, but the world as a whole and the state is going to continue on, and there will be somebody to pick up those reins. So I hope that you've enjoyed this look at some characters that you might not have considered to be as important as they certainly are. I'm not going to force that opinion on you, but you know, it's true. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at these guys who come into power at the end of their respective tragedies. Until next time, here on the Shakespeare Minute, I'm Cassius. Think of the world.
That's great, it starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes